それでは、これより第2部
We would now like to start the second part of the program. The theme for part 2 is Natural Resource Management for Sustainable Urban Development. The facilitator for this session is Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, Vice Rector of the UN University. The profiles of the speakers are stated in the program, so please refer to the material. I would like to hand off the microphone to Professor Takeuchi.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Takeuchi. I'm a Vice Rector of the United Nations University and also the Director of the Institute here in headquarters, which is called the Institute for Sustainability and Peace. Because of shortage of time, I would like to directly introduce my colleague, Mr. Kazu Takemoto. It's a little bit confusing. We are having the different name when we write our name in Chinese character, but if we translate into English, and the name is exactly the same. And so we are saying something sometimes that brother or the Kazu number 1 or number 2. And so I request him to deliver his speech.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi, or Kazu number 1, and Kazu number 2 would like to follow up. My topic today, the Satoyama Initiative and the implication for sustainable urban development. I have the 3 topics under this title. What is the Satoyama Initiative? The secondly, International Partnership for Satoyama Initiative, so-called IPSI. The thirdly, the biodiversity for sustainable cities. First, what is Satoyama and what is the Satoumi? We had conducted the research activities, so-called the sub-global assessment. A couple of years ago, Professor Takeuchi has been fully involved in this research activity. We have defined as it says, the dynamic mosaic of the managed socio-ecological systems producing a bundle of ecosystem service for human well-being. So it is very difficult to understand. However, if you can take a look at the pictures, the natures and the human beings have the benefit from the activities by using sustainable usage of the nature resources. The right-hand side, the sea landscape as well. We have been communicating with our sort of counterparts throughout the world to develop Satoyama Initiative, and we have found the similar practice, similar landscape, similar ideas as the Satoyama. However, by using different names based on the different cultures, that is very interesting to know. Like France, Nepal, Cuba, Peru, Malawi, a lot of similar exercise practices under the socio-ecological production landscape. It is very interesting and the important thing. These landscape has been formed through long-term interaction between the human and nature. A lot of benefit from the socio-ecological production landscape. You can find some of them. Livelihood, the benefit, poverty alleviation, the socio-ecological production landscape can contribute to the Millennium Development Goals, climate change mitigation as the carbon sinks, as well as the adaptation. And also the landscape approach can achieve the biodiversity targets. However, the landscape have faced some difficulties such as rural depopulation, aging population, and by that these landscape have been abandoned degraded because of the population growth, as well as overexploitation and lost by unplanned urbanization, industrialization. What can do for that? The one is the solutions. This is Satoyama Initiative. The Satoyama Initiative, once again, the socio-ecological production landscape approach can contribute to address this problem and recover or rebuild the Satoyama, the kind of sand landscape. This approach can contribute to also to address the three objectives under the Convention on Biodiversity, namely conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of the biological diversity, as well as fair and equitable sharing of the benefit arising from the utilization of genetic resources. And this is why Satoyama Initiative can be shared around the world. Next topic is development of international partnership for Satoyama Initiative. And toward COP10 in 2010 Nagoya, the Japanese government asked United Nations University Institute of Advanced Study, UNUIAS, to prepare, to discuss, or to launch international partnership. And we have asked Professor Takeuchi to take the lead in developing the concept of the Satoyama Initiative as defined, as I introduced before. And 1 year before the COP10, we started international discussion by making full use of expert workshop around the world. We started this discussion from here, Tokyo, the UNU headquarters, and we organized workshop in Penang, Malaysia, Paris, as well as Brazil. And we have eventually succeeded in launching the international partnership at the COP10 in Nagoya. And this is the launching ceremony, and we have found in the center our director, Professor Parai, as well as the Professor Takeuchi, as one of the co-founder of this program. We have a variety of the participating organizations, such as government, NGOs, private sectors, and indigenous community organization, as well as academic organization. At the beginning, in 2010, we have only 51 organizations as a participant or partners. Nowadays, last week, in fact, we had the General Assembly annual meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, and including newly endorsed organization, we have now 117 partners around the world. Then we are now at the operational phase. I can say the 2 categories and 5 activities, such as for research, policy research, knowledge facilitation, as well as indicators research, under the big category of research, capacity building, as well as on the ground activities, that is to support the activities as the capacity building. This is once again development of the international partnership. Then what I should say that here, that is more than 40 research activities, policy, or collaborative activities has been already shared. And now this is time to discuss the more strategic approach. This is the so-called next step. The UNU has been working together with the University of Tokyo to have the brainstorming sessions as the task force to discuss new business models, new commons, as well as resilience. Now, resilience already, during the last session, the Professor Kashim pointed out the importance of resilience, in particular, focusing on short-term and such as sudden disasters, things as well as the longer term, the gradual environmental change, such as impact by the climate change. This is the most typical kind of challenge in Japan. As you know, the last year, March 11th, we experienced the Great East Japan earthquake. Now, to recover or to reconstruct the post-disasters program, the Satoyama approach, Satoyama initiative approach, should be further developed to be applied to the post-disasters event. And once again, but the large natural disasters, it is very hard, or the limitation to prevent the sudden large natural disasters. And therefore, it is very important to consider some resilient society to cope with the sudden disasters, as well as to gradual transformation for longer time. That is very big challenge. However, at the same time, we are now challenging to recover or reconstruct the post-disaster areas, so-called the Sanriku-Fukko National Park. That means the reconstruction natural park will be developed. New innovative idea has been developed. In particular, Ministry of the Environment of Japan has consulted with the National Council on the environmental policy. It has Nature Conservation Committee, which is chaired by Professor Takeuchi here, and they discuss how we can create this idea and how we can cope with this phenomena, and also enhancing resilience in particular for longer time. That is a new challenge, but it is very important to cope. Last point in my agenda, the biodiversity for sustainable cities. And once again, in Nagoya, we had the COP decision to discuss the sustainable cities, in particular, plan of action on sustainable the subnational government, cities, and the local authorities for biodiversities. And there are a lot of the initiative or action to be taken. And UNUIAS has the program, the so-called SUF, Sustainable Urban Futures. We are now, through this program, we are working together with the Biodiversity Convention, Biodiversity Secretariat, as well as local government, so-called ICRE, as our director, Professor Parail, pointed out. And also our program, support the initiative, Local Action for Biodiversity Program, so-called LAB Lab program. Then the conclusion, the Satoyama initiative approach can be applied to sustainable urban development, and at the same time can contribute to achieving the Aichi targets. Number two, in the context of future development of Satoyama initiative, it is crucial to enhance resilience, both in coping with the sudden disasters, short term, and in dealing with, for longer time, the gradual transformations, such as impact of climate change. Lastly, Mr. Chair, the local authorities play a very important role, crucial role in addressing biodiversity in cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takemoto. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Van Marka Kablaj from the Asia Regional International Union for Conservation of Nature, and she is serving as the Asian Regional Director. So, Ms. Avan, please.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests and my gracious hosts, both from the UN Center for Regional Development and especially the Director, Chikako Takase, and the United Nations University. Let me start by saying how very pleased I am to be here today speaking on natural resource management for sustainable urban development. It's a serious and often poorly understood issue, although some of the speakers before us would indicate that there is a depth of knowledge that we would all be wise to listen to. From a purely natural resource management point of view, it should give us pause to note that currently, while cities cover a mere 2% of land space worldwide, they consume a major 75% of the resources of that land. Most people, from lawyers and doctors in London's commercial centres to street cleaners in Dhaka's slums, admit to the existence of an intrinsic relationship between urban development and natural resource management. No matter what level of society you come from, we are all aware of how much our lives depend on the natural resources that sustain it. Unfortunately, the exact nature of the relationships are still being debated by the experts and so far not being adequately addressed by the stakeholders involved in conservation and urban development, which is basically the theme of my speech. One reason for this is that different sets of experts and institutions engaged in these sectors look at the issues from different perspectives. And the implications of this are far-reaching and often mutually conflicting and thereby easily misunderstood. Hence, it's very strategic that we are here today trying to understand how to work together in this fast-changing world on the issues affecting the well-being of humans and the planet as a whole. And these issues are particularly relevant for Asia, the continent we're in. As shared earlier by my distinguished colleagues, urban centers are growing at an exponential rate. Around 50% of the world's 7 billion people live in cities today. The urban population of Africa and Asia alone is expected to double by 2030. Most of the fastest growing urban centers today are in our continent, China, and particularly in China and India. The 6 most densely populated cities in the world and 15 of the world's 26 megacities are in Asia. And you know all about that from being in Tokyo today. Currently, Asia houses about 70% of the world's poor, which means that nearly 1 in 3 Asians live below the poverty line. 25% of Asia's urban population is poor, and with the continuous influx of poor people into the urban centers, this number is increasing at a dramatic pace. Urbanization has become one of the most important drivers of global environmental change. It has direct implications on natural resources, ecology, biodiversity, and pollution. It is therefore a crucial need to gain a better understanding of the functioning of the urban centers and their linkages with natural resource management, with biodiversity and the Sustainable Development Agenda. And these are just a few of the reasons why the mainstream conservation sector must not only become actively involved, but lead the urban development debate. And I come from the world of conservation and sustainable development, so I think naturally that this is very much where it all should start. My own organization, IUCN, through the World Commission on Protected Areas Urban Specialist Group, is already working in this regard. And this group works on the premise of trying to integrate these two traditionally assumed separate worlds. First, conservation organizations depend on urban people for political and financial support. But city dwellers tend to have less and less contact with nature, and people can appreciate nature only if they know it. The lives and livelihoods of urban people depend on good management of natural resources, especially in the hinterland of cities. Giving urban people easy access to recreation in nature helps them physically and emotionally, and there's a direct correlation now proved between health and a green environment in which people can live, just in terms of stress and clean air. Urban landscapes offer opportunities for learning about nature and sustainability, and urban sprawl, by contrast, is a major threat to biodiversity and to human health. There are natural solutions to the challenges posed by climate change in urban areas. Protecting, restoring, and mimicking natural areas reduces vulnerability, enhances resilience to sea rise, ocean storm surges, flooding, and mudslides. Currently, best practice in city planning uses the idea of green infrastructure, that is, a strategically planned network of high-quality green spaces. And in cities where this has been done, again, there is direct positive correlations with health and human well-being. Urban protected areas can be important sources of income from tourism. Cities can have major negative impacts on surrounding ecosystems, polluting the air and freshwater and marine systems, often for great distances, which generally means a deterioration in the quality of life. So on the face of it, cities may appear to be concrete and steel jungles, but they're not isolated from natural ecosystems and have these very ecosystems as their foundation. Underneath the sprawling urban areas are the waterways, the soil, and the areas beyond the city boundaries. An incorporation of a green infrastructure practice would go a long way in supporting sustainable development in urban areas. By promoting quality green space within cities, biodiversity can not only be protected but enhanced. Beyond supporting a variety of species and habitats, urban green spaces contribute to essential services including water filtration, absorption, nutrient cycling, air filtration, and noise buffering. And recent studies have indicated that urban biodiversity contributes in ways we can hardly imagine to multiple ecosystem services that are of great importance for people's well-being. They include, among others, reductions in local air pollution and noise, reduction in the urban heat island effects, direct health benefits, key environments for enhanced public ecological knowledge, and awareness of local to global sustainability challenges. Studies also show that sufficient and well-planned green spaces in urban centers have a beneficial impact not only on the physical health of humans, but on mental well-being and cognitive functions. The green spaces also contribute positively towards social interaction, integration, the lack of stress and conflict in community cohesion. With rising human population growth and migration rates, there will be nearly 2 billion urban residents by 2030. But the consequences of both current and future urbanization for biodiversity conservation are poorly acknowledged. One study suggests that 8% of terrestrial vertebrate species on the IUCN Red List, which is the world's red list in terms of the health of our species, are imperiled largely because of urban development. By 2030, 50 additional ecoregions are expected to lose more than 5% of their remaining undeveloped area, and these regions contain a staggering 118 vertebrate species found nowhere else. In addition, the distance between protected areas and cities is predicted to shrink dramatically. For example, the median distance from a protected area to a city in East Asia is predicted to fall from 43 kilometers to 23 kilometers by 2030, which means they all become much more accessible to urban sprawl. 88% of protected areas likely to be impacted by new urban growth are in countries of low to moderate income, potentially limiting institutional capacity to adapt to new anthropogenic stresses on protected areas. In short, trends in global ecoregions, rare species, protected areas suggest localized but significant biodiversity degradation associated with coming urbanization. Urban ecosystems such as urban, green, and blue spaces may have a crucial role in building the necessary capacity to cope with environmental change and especially climate change. Cities like New York, New Orleans, Berlin, Singapore, and Cape Town have shown investments in tree planting, green roofs, ecological restoration projects are now growing rapidly as part of a low-carbon strategy to increase human capacity to adapt to the inevitable climate changes our world is undergoing. In fact, the importance of green infrastructure in urban policy has risen as an agenda in recent years as a direct response to climate change and the need to move towards a low-carbon economy. And now I'll move to another issue which is equally important, which is water scarcity. Water shortages affect 40% of the world's population, while about 2.6 billion lack access to adequate sanitation. Scientists warn that by 2025, more than 2/3 of the world's population will face water shortages. Urban population grows by 2 people every second, and 27% of the urban population in the developing world does not have piped water in their homes. Watersheds provide water for urban population, and they're facing numerous threats, from pollution, from development, from fire, from soil erosion, from drought, and from flooding. The production of surface water for municipal use is an ecosystem service that is generally neither paid for by cities nor individual water consumers, including industrial companies. Water tariffs usually account for the services of capturing, treating, and delivering water, but not for the production of water itself. I cannot stress enough the importance of the goods and services provided by healthy watersheds to water consumers. Flow regulation, flood control, filtration, protection against runoff, erosion, and sedimentation are but a few of the services these ecosystems provide us with. And when one uses market-based mechanisms, such as payment for ecosystem services, many cities worldwide have successfully safeguarded the natural water purification services of their watersheds and thereby avoided expensive treatment systems, saving their residents millions of dollars. The past few years have witnessed a surge of interest in the development of payments for environmental services programs in Asia. And a number of donor-driven scoping assessments and action research pilot studies are underway, primarily in Indonesia, the Philippines, India, Nepal, Vietnam, and China. And I'll share one example in which my organization is personally involved, which has actually begun to demonstrate how this works, in the linkages between water provision services of an ecosystem and the city of Beijing, one of the most populated cities in the world. Outside Beijing, there is a reservoir called the Mayun Reservoir, which has significant forest cover, and it's the main source of drinking water for 17 million residents of Beijing. It's a city that faces a serious water crisis. But today, as it stands, the watershed is unhealthy. It fails to address the needs of those who depend upon it. What we've started doing with the government of China and a number of partners is the process of restoring the watershed and improving local people's lives. And the first thing we did was actually persuade the government to lift the ban on logging, because the government was under the assumption that by banning the cutting of trees, you were actually saving the watershed. In actual fact, it was the reverse, because people were cutting anyway. The forests that provide most of Beijing's water are being given a new lease of life by the partial lifting of the logging quota for the first time in 20 years. And this change is part of a wider evolution in understanding how best to manage forests in the watershed, just north of the Chinese capital. A much more integrated form of landscape management and restoration has been introduced to the Mayun landscape, which recognizes the multiple needs and functions of the watershed and brings together the many different stakeholders, sectors and levels of scale which have interests in them. Although it may first sound contradictory, allowing local people to harvest certain wood and tree products will not only improve their livelihoods and earning capacity, it will also permit better care for the forest, boosting the biodiversity and functioning of the natural systems that supply up to 70% of the drinking water. Through the changes in the project, it aims to affect the Mayun landscape and livelihoods, and they're long-term in nature. And we're already seeing positive signs. Participatory planning has resulted in a formal agreement to recognize different forest management and use regimes, harmonizing the technical information held by government foresters with local knowledge and interests. A set of close-to-nature silviculture treatments has been developed. It's being implemented by local communities, and it has resulted in the regeneration of natural forests, in improvement to forest structure, quality, and function. A permit for harvesting timber has been secured, first such quota in more than 20 years. A new system of harvesting fuel wood has been put into place, and significant progress has been made in reducing local wood demands. Support has been given to the development of cooperative arrangements for utilizing and developing the market potential of forest goods and services, with the aim of increasing and diversifying local income and setting in place local structures that will be sustainable over the long term. And as a result, the watershed services have been improved, and the resilience of that watershed has been protected, and therefore the water that goes into Beijing. The resilience of our urban centers against climate change is a big challenge which needs to be addressed. And the last decade has seen the most numbers of natural disasters, as you've heard from our previous speakers, in the history of the world. And rapidly expanding urban settlements in the developing world are and will continue to bear the brunt of severe climatic risks. Urban populations will increasingly be forced to cope with frequent incidents of cyclones, flooding, landslides, heat stress. Cities in developing countries are at particular risk due to their high-density population, lack of adequate drainage channels, concentration of solid and liquid wastes, expansive informal settlements, and urban expansion into risky sites. Despite these challenges, present climate change adaptation-related projects largely ignore the urban areas in favor of rural-focused activities. Recent research highlights an urgent need to improve our understanding and action on climate vulnerability and adaptation in urban areas as an urgent priority, particularly where poverty levels and population growth rates are highest. According to the IPCC's second working group report, the most vulnerable urban settlements are generally those in coastal and floodplain areas, where the economies are closely linked with climate-sensitive resources, and in those areas prone to extreme weather events, especially where rapid urbanization is occurring. In this scenario, along with bioengineering solution, one vital measure in urban land use planning is the provision for urban protected areas. And this could go a long way in not only providing habitats for biodiversity, air purification, water treatment, but also enable ecosystem services to positively contribute towards reducing the risk through acting as barriers for high energy waves, cyclones, and flood regulation. The recent floods in Bangkok that others have mentioned and shown slides of is a case in point. Experts say that through the better management of wetlands and reservoirs, effective measures could be undertaken to reduce the impact of any such future disaster. Bangkok has basically paved over all the drainage areas, the sponges that existed around the city, which could have absorbed that water. It's not surprising they had the floods they did. The floods in Thailand affected around 13.6 million people, and they caused more than $45 billion in economic loss. And if ever there was a wake-up call to the direct correlation between how urban centers are developed and the neglect of the natural environment that sustains them, the Bangkok floods was certainly one. So let us not forget in conclusion that global urbanism, with its considerable footprint and impact, is reshaping the ecology of the entire planet. For a sustainable solution, we must redefine traditional urban development and conservation approaches. It's imperative that both conservationists and urban development experts work together and present a joint integrated way forward for human and ecosystem sustained well-being for our planet's future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time is running, and we have not so much time for discussion, but first I would like to ask two questions to the two panelists. First questions, two questions to my friend Kazu. One question is that at the Rio+20, the green economy, particularly in the context of poverty alleviation, will be discussed. How you could combine your Satayama initiative with this green economy, particularly focuses on the poverty alleviation?
Thank you. In regard to the green economy, as the main topic of the Rio+20, as I touched on the benefits of the Satayama initiative, this contribute to the addressing the poverty alleviation. In particular, the Satayama initiative, the socio-ecological production, the landscape, which can contribute not only for the biodiversity, but also human well-being. That means we can get the benefit from the sustainable use of the natural resources, and for instance, some rural or local community can get some economic benefit through sustainable use of the socio-ecological landscape. That is the quick response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is about the linkage between the city and the Satayama or Satayama-like landscape, because this symposium is focusing on the sustainable urban development, and so how the Satayama initiative can contribute to the establishment of sustainable urban future.
This is another challenging our international partnership wish to address, and again Satayama means that is the landscape with nature, and city has also a lot of the room or space as the natural resources. City parks and trees and waters. That is the opportunity for us, Satayama initiative, to take part in the addressing the sustainable city. That is we do not focus on the rural area. We would like to encourage our partners to address the urban areas, the sustainability, in particular, addressing the biodiversity. I think the Satayama Initiative approach can be applied quite easily, in particular the developing countries as well as the developed country, to be applied by the similar approach as Satayama Initiative. But again, this is the new challenge, and we wish to continue our endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I would ask to Ms. Abamaka Kablash about the issues related with the first CBD discussion. We could have a very good fruitful result during the COP10 in Nagoya in 2010. And we could adapt the Aichi target, subdivide into 20 categories. It includes not only the physical target, but also some sort of a social target. How we could mainstreaming the biodiversity issues, particularly in the context of urban sustainable development. This is crucial issues, not just to recover the nature or restore the ecosystem services, but how the people know the importance of the biodiversity and conserving of the biological resources. Do you have any idea how we could mainstream?
Well, I would not dare to give you a full comprehensive answer because it's such a big issue. But let me start by saying that much of the work that Japan did for the Nagoya meeting, and I think this may be the first time that one has actually done this in such a planned fashion, where there has been not just an incidental handing over from one CBD COP to another. But in this case, we have worked very closely with the government of Japan for the Nagoya COP, particularly in terms of biodiversity. And IUCN, my own organization, was very much part of the drafting of the convention. So we have a fairly integral link to what it says. And we're now working with your government in putting forward a number of the ideas that came out of Nagoya into the Hyderabad meeting. And one of the things that India is taking forward into the Hyderabad meeting is a very strong focus on livelihoods and biodiversity. So that, I think, is very interesting because livelihoods and biodiversity, I think, particularly from the perspective of countries like India, has to take into consideration urban settlements. You cannot just focus on rural livelihoods, and particularly in countries where the economy is growing so, so fast, and where there is this huge rural urban transition population, and not just one in terms of settlement permanently, but also just in terms of moving back and forth on a daily basis. I mean, in Indian cities, you actually have, and I suppose you must to some extent even in Tokyo, have a population that moves back and forth morning and night, which goes into millions. Yeah. And clearly that depends on transportation, it depends on urban services, and it has an impact on the biodiversity of the cities, how the roads and the transport systems are planned, and what kind of impact they have. So what I would say is that there is a real opportunity now, and I'm thinking particularly of the Satayama Initiative and the Satumi Initiative, which I was not aware of, which for me, from a marine perspective, is very, very interesting, because the coastal cities, I think, are going to take the greatest brunt in terms of climate change. To perhaps build this into the whole livelihoods discussion that India is going to take forward into Hyderabad. And we are directly involved in organizing some of those consultations. So this meeting has given me lots of opportunity to try and ensure that your perspectives are brought into that.
Thank you very much. My second question is very much related with what you said already, is most of the Asian mega cities are located along the coast. And so it is seems to be extremely important to try to combine the urban sustainable future with the conservation of marine ecosystems and marine biodiversity, particularly. Most of the urbanized areas are covered with the artificial infrastructures, but how we could renaturalize this type of landscape is one of the crucial issues for the improvement of biodiversity and so on. So do you have any idea how we could consider the importance of the coastal marine biodiversity in the context of a sustainable urban future?
Yes, I think that's something that you're absolutely right, and for us, this is not it came up in extreme prominence at the time of the Asian tsunami, and in fact, a number of those lessons are already being fed into some of your rehabilitation experience in the north of Japan after the tragic tsunami that took place a year ago. What was observed at the time from a lot of the primary data that came out was that where you had coastal settlements, which were buffered by some kind of natural infrastructure, particularly in this case mangrove forests, but also, casuarina forests, coastal forests, even coral reefs. Where you had a natural infrastructure, the impact of the tsunami and the death and devastation rate went down dramatically. And there are case studies from Sri Lanka, for example, where one village which had cleared the mangroves was completely devastated and the surge went in miles. And another village, literally a few hundred yards down, that had maintained the mangrove forest, remained reasonably intact. In Bangladesh, after the storms and typhoons that used to take place in the 1970s, they had a policy that replanted the mangroves in the delta. And you will have noticed that in the news over the last 10, 15 years, you don't hear of that kind of massive devastation and loss of life. Although the storm surges are, if anything, the same, if not worse. The typhoons go up the Bay of Bengal every year, and yet human life is not being lost in the same way. Partly it's an emergency response strategy, low cost, but it's also the replanting of the mangrove forests. And in the last cyclone, Sidr, they estimated the cyclone wiped out, completely flattened the mangroves up to, I think, about 7 kilometers up the coast. They reckoned that if the mangroves had not been there, the storm surge would have gone up another 20 kilometers. I mean, this is just straightforward evidence of what is necessary. Yeah, yeah. So where we are working, like for example in Vietnam, as barriers to climate change, you do need some of the hard engineering solutions because the natural infrastructure will not cause the kind of protection like dikes, But what we do is we combine it with, say, mangrove and tree plantation and dikes. So that one, the soil infrastructure is much more stable, and the regeneration of the protective barrier is low cost because the trees grow back.
Thank you very much. We're also trying to consider how we could strengthen the resilience through the rehabilitation of a natural environment along the coast in Tohoku, the process of rebuilding of affected areas. Yeah. Thank you very much. Before I open the floor to all the participants, I would like to ask Monte Kasem, my friend, about your view, because you're a key person trying to combine the two sessions. I have two things. One is I visited Sri Lanka, and you have a very useful way of using the biodiversity with a sustainable manner, like a candy and a home garden. Or I also visited ancient irrigation system in Sri Lanka. And so I would like to ask you about your thought in how we could use a traditional way of thinking or traditional knowledge in the process of strengthening of resilience. So this is my one question. And the second one is, of course, Sri Lanka was affected by the tsunami very recently. And so, again, in comparison with the Japanese disaster in Tohoku, you could say something from the viewpoint of the comparison between the two.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Takeuchi. I think you've hit two very important areas which are underappreciated and often overlooked. Just to give you an example of how important the biodiversity and the home garden relationship is, when Sri Lanka was not self-sufficient in food and decided to re-look at her large old irrigation systems and started settling people once more in the north of Sri Lanka and in the east of Sri Lanka, there were many people who did not get land through that scheme who came and were squatters. But very often, the squatter settlements, home gardens, were better managed than the formal settlers' home gardens. And once the government realized that, they immediately authorized those squatter settlements because of the quality of their home gardens. The home garden tradition is very much like Satoyama in Sri Lanka, where 1/3 of the home garden is your house, and all the tree crops are planted near it, the crops that require you to be watering them. And as you go towards the mountain, the tree crops that don't need watering are planted. So your normal home garden production is only on 2/3, and 1/3 is contiguous with the forest behind. And the last 1/3 is only used in emergencies. It's the resilient bit. The other 2/3 is used in normal times, but when there is a disaster and you can't use the normal 2/3, you go to that 1/3 and sometimes even to the forest. So I think Satoyama and the study of traditional home gardens bordering a large nature reserve is very useful. So please proceed with this kind of investigation. The second thing about the tsunami, of course, I think Ms. Maka has already answered part of that. The natural dune systems, the natural mangrove systems, where they were not destroyed for hotel development and things like that, protected the settlements behind them. The other aspect of the tsunami, which I don't know how relevant it is to Japan, but there were no dead large animals, although the nature reserve was hit by this tsunami, because it is said that large animals like elephants and bears could sense the vibrations and started migrating. So if we are observing nature, we would have indications of a tsunami warning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I would like to open the floor for your question or comments. Yeah, please. Could you use the microphone and first identify yourself, please?
I'm Anthony Halog from the University of Maine in USA, although I'm a Filipino citizen, but also a Canadian. I actually agreed the point of Professor Kasum. I think the animals can feel this vibration, and that's similar thinking in Indonesia, what happened where they felt that. And I also agree the point of Ms. Maka, where in the Philippines, where a lot of typhoons are happening, and the mangrove issue is a big concern. And actually, I have encouraged some of the Filipinos to replant this mangrove forest so that we could really prevent or avoid any further disasters happening in the Philippines. So I commend that these important suggestions to address these issues, particularly the interrelation of the natural systems as well as the urban systems. We need to take this into account, particularly in redesigning both the urban as well as the rural environment. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any reaction to his comments or no?
I would agree.
Any other question or comments? Yes?
Actually, Ms. Maka, there is a very interesting experiment in Malaysia which might be of use to you, and also it relates to what Professor Takeuchi raised about looking at our coastal systems, because large cities are on the borders of the coast. In this rebuilding, there were two key points. One was to see where would the coral spores stick on a damaged marine ecosystem. And what we found in this investigation was coral spores are surprisingly resilient. And they will stick on anything, from drain pipes to building wastes to whatever. So in creating those engineering infrastructures, if there is building waste, they can be used as places on which coral spores can fast-track their resurgence. However, to make that a sustainable exercise, you need to create the food web on which the coral feeds. And the key that the Malaysians found was the giant clam located strategically, which would culture zooxanthelia, which every now and again the clam would release. And if those zooxanthelia fell where the coral spores were lying around, the food web becomes complete. And there is an almost magical restoration within 4 to 6 years of the coral reef. I have found this to be the most economical and nature-combined way of resurrecting a coral reef, and it would merit further study, I think. Thank you.
Okay, Michael.
Yes, I'd like to ask the speakers to address the question of how do we take to scale the creation of stronger governance structures and institutional capacity to manage land use, both formally and informally. The challenge that we see in so many parts of the world is indeed that the formal governance structures either don't work very effectively or they're very corrupt, that a lot of land is managed through informal settlements that are not subject to planning processes, and where we do have planning processes that come into operation, they often are more vulnerable to being pressured by short-term profitability for real estate development interests or resource exploitation interests than they are for long-term sustainability interests.
Yes.
And so, I mean, we see some effective models, for example, in creation of marine protected areas, which, you know, are starting to create that resilient cycle in which communities can benefit from the tourism of protecting areas from fishing exploitation or coral dynamiting or mangrove destruction. But how do we bring these mechanisms to scale quickly in the urban-rural interface and in how we manage poorly managed, existing, sprawling, and fast-growing urban settlements?
Thank you very much for raising these issues. This is also very important items to be discussed at the Rio+20 in addition to the green economy. So I would like to ask the two panelists about the governance issues. It's very important and it's very urgent to be developed.
Thank you. This is a tough one, but let me try. But I think the combination is very important. I mean, the national government, from the global perspective, sort of the framework should be developed, and also the land ownership or tenure. That is depending on the variety of the background of the local circumstances. However, having said that, I have said that the combination between the framework as well as local practice at the ground level practice, I think the local community, as well as the local government authority, which have understand more easily in terms of the local community as well as local circumstances. Once again, my point is the framework should be developed under the government initiative. At the same time, the local authority should be delegated from such kind of global basis instruction. That could be one of the solution, but once again, this is the tough question that should be continued to discuss. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I agree, it's not easy, but let me tell you that there is, I mean, this issue of scaling up is really the answer. If we could scale up the successes we have in countries in addressing the problems and bring them into, policy and political support, a lot of the problems we have would be greatly reduced. But there's nothing like a disaster to really focus the mind. And if you work quickly and produce the models in the 5 years or so after a disaster, there is a tremendous amount of political receptivity, and there's also a great amount of civil society support that one can engender. And certainly, after the Asian tsunami, we produced this program, which now 8 countries and now 10 are coming into, called Mangroves for the Future. And we use the mangrove tree as the symbol, but in fact, it's the coastal ecosystem. And now we found that in the countries where we're working, any kind of planning that destroys mangroves, immediately the media and the press and civil society are picking it up. And that I'm not suggesting that there hasn't been a lot of reversal of the original good intentions in terms of the coastal management, but I am saying that there is far greater hesitation in going out there and destroying coastal ecosystems, because people have understood that they're vital in terms of resilience to climate change. And the mangrove in particular, I'll just finish, perhaps people don't realize this, is an extremely interesting ecosystem, because not only are all the fisheries of the coasts dependent on it, because that's where the fish lay all the spawn, but in addition to which, the mangrove tree has now been proved to be the best sink of carbon of any tree in the world. The amount of carbon the mangrove captures, both in the anoxic soil and in its own biology, it's one of the I think, the best tree so far in terms of carbon capture. So from that point of view, it's very, very important.
Thank you very much, because we're far behind the schedule, and so I'd like to conclude this session by saying that we could get some sort of a consensus to recognize the importance of strengthening the resilience in harmony with nature. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Professor Takeuchi as well as the panelists. Thank you very much. We should now move to the part 3, but if you could wait for a few moments whilst we rearrange the stage. Thank you. Now we should move to the part 3. In part 3, we will hear from the Chief of Kitakyushu, Mr. Hitsumoto, Director of International Environment Strategies Division, to talk to us on Japanese experience in promoting sustainable cities, case study of Kitakyushu. So, Mr. Hitsumoto, please.
Japanese, so please use this receivers for English channel 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation to the symposium. So this is the very last session, and I would like to speak of the case study of Kitakyushu for the Japanese experience in promoting sustainable cities. Why Kitakyushu? It seems that Kitakyushu is the eco-model city as well as the environmental future city, and in the OECD's the green the sustainable city, we have been given a good assessment in all these regards. Some of you may not know about the city of Kitakyushu. It is right at the common straits of the Fukuoka prefecture. It is right in the middle of the Tokyo and the Shanghai. We have about 350 million or so. Sorry, we have about 1 million or so. And we are well-developed industrial city. And for the environmental protection, sustainable development, I'm sure you are well aware of the necessity of that. There will be burden on the environment as well as the demand on energy may be growing. So we need to, at the same time, try to achieve economic development as well as environmental protection. So Kitakyushu City is fully aware of the necessity of sustainable development from these two regards. This is looking at the past experiences of my city. In the photograph on the left-hand side, as you can see, in the high-growth era from 1950s to 1960s, the sky and the sea. And on the right-hand side, you can see the sky and the sea. Right now, we can see good improvement on the environment. On the lower half, we see the charts for the air as well as the water. You can see a dramatic improvement. And some of the factors being cited are the local initiative as well as a partnership in the local community. The initiative taken by Kitakyushu is first of all what was established with the women's the group which has started their involvement back in the 1950s, and then the businesses and the universities that have they responded, and it has expanded into the big movement. And in the Kitakyushu's initiative, the local initiative's importance is being cited in the UN SCAP's the Clean Environment Kitakyushu Initiative. And this is the statistics that are taken, which is looking at the CO2 the emissions per the net production from the 1960s onwards. As you can see, the efficiency has improved significantly. The cleaner production and other energy conservation and energy efficiency improvement efforts that have contributed much. And as was mentioned earlier, the World Bank has made a study into Kitakyushu City, and this is the result. In the 1968, which was at the peak, as you can see, up until 1968 to 1980, as the economy has grown, the environment has also improved because of the process improvement being seen through energy conservation as well as energy efficiency efforts. So we have amply proven that economic development will be able to be preceded with the improvement in the environment. And we would like to send this message to the other Asian cities, especially for the sustainable cities to be created. We need to have consensus in the local community. The different stakeholders and actors need to share the philosophy, and we need to align our orientation and objectives. And the grand design that have been formulated, taking 2 years with the various stakeholders participating in the formulation. And this is the grand design. The basic philosophy is to try to pass on to the future generation the town which have been built with the genuine affluence and genuine richness. We need to be in symbiosis. We need to live together and create together. We need to have the economy to be boosted through the environmental technology, and we should try to upgrade the sustainability of the cities. So these are the 3 pillars. And in 2008, we have been chosen to be the eco-model city by the Japanese government, and we would go for the low-carbon society building. And we have come up with the a plan of action for Kitakyushu City, and with the assumption of 40% economic growth, and by the year 2050 for the Kitakyushu, the CO2 will be reduced by 50%, and for Asia, something equivalent to 150% of the reduction of CO2 is to be reduced in the Asian region as a whole. And that has been the target we have established for ourselves in the plan of action. And as for the specific endeavors, the local governance is very important. We need to have participation of the civil society, and we have many groups and bodies participating, and we need to create a relevant platform for this purpose. And the individuals need to be engaged in their own efforts. So we have the recycling campaign as well as composting at home, and subsidies are given by the city government for all these efforts. And as a consequence of that, as you can see, This is looking at the level of the home waste emissions, and it was more than 700 grams per person per day, but right now it is about 500 grams or so, and recycling has doubled on the other hand. For urban planning, the city building, we need to go for low carbon, including renewables and so forth, to be utilized in a visible manner for the citizens. We have the solar, the photovoltaics, as well as the wind farms and the greening of the rooftops. And we are trying to have all these model projects visible to the eyes of the citizens, and trying to enhance and encourage the citizens for the green economy. And we have the wind farms as well as the photovoltaics, solar energy, the HEMS and BEMS. All sorts of environmental technology are being introduced for managing the buildings. So we have sustainable buildings in trying to reduce the power use, as well as efficient the use of the energy. And apart from Japan Railways, we have monorail for the public transport. And we connect the downtown area and the suburbs. And as the city's own policy, we have no My Car Day been established, so that the citizens will not use their own cars. And we have a cooperation with the shopping streets to encourage the people to provide discounts, and also to win some of the points to be used later for those people who have come via the mass transit mode. And electric vehicles are becoming more popular. And for the usual the vehicles, the eco-drive, for instance, to have the accelerator to be touched gently, and to have accelerator to be as much as possible to minimize its use. And after the disaster, energy has become a very acute issue. Smart grid system, METI has selected 4 regions around the world in Japan to conduct a demonstration project. In the case of Kitakyushu, is the region which is the land made vacant after Nippon Steel. Higashida region has been used as the demonstration site, not the normal utility, but the local Nippon Steel's cogeneration is being used as power, and the renewable energy and other things will be mixed to create a smart grid community, BEMS and HEMS. This is to reduce CO2 by 50% and to introduce more renewable energy by 10%. Major feature about this is that not only energy, but the smart meters have been installed, so that interactive information sharing is made possible. This is over the long term. If energy is not to be used over the long term, then the elderly people's health and safety would be monitored if power is not used for a certain period. So this is also a mechanism to enhance security purposes as well. In the area of industry, one is that greening of the industry and industrialization of green policy. These are the two-pronged approaches being taken for enhancing green growth in the industry. Green products. This is taking the form of eco-premium. Highly environmental friendly products would be designated with eco-premium system. For example, photovoltaic system equipped apartments, about 200 such products have been designated. So the advantage of environmental function is appealed in promoting products. As a result of designation, a certain company had seen its sales grow by 4 times. So this is good both for greening of the community as well as development of the industry. This is one example. Inverter. In the world of industry, CO2, about 70% of CO2 is generated from running motors. So by using inverter, this motor operation could be controlled, and as a result, there could be a major reduction in CO2 generation. 300 million tons of CO2 reduction has been made possible. So this is about 1% of CO2 emissions around the world. So with this product, that reduction is made possible according to some data. in the initial video, we have seen recycling efforts, and this is the case of Kita-Kyushu Ecotown. About 40 facilities or projects are currently underway. For example, PET bottles or autos recycling or 3R demonstration area are now being operated. And in terms of CO2 equivalent, 380,000 tons of CO2 reduction has been made possible according to estimates. In terms of economic investments, about 70 billion have been made, and 1,300 jobs have been created locally. These are economic advantages. This is according to a simulation. By conducting these recycling efforts, 380,000 tons of CO2 was reduced. Another major feature is in Kita-Kyushu. In view of problems faced by developing countries, these approaches, these programs must be communicated to other countries in Asia as part of economic development. We are receiving trainees, JICA, and local foundation called Kaita. We are coordinating with such organizations, and thus far 6,000 trainees have been received from outside of Japan. An intercity network has been created to work on these projects. One of them is with Dalian, a friendship city. This is a comparison of Dalian skies between 1994 and today. This looks similar to Kita-Kyushu skies in the past. A town of pollution has been transformed into a town of greenery. And from UNEP, a global award has been received. If you look at the data, SO2 is now below the environmental criteria level. So these are some of the achievements made. This is a common problem amongst the Asian countries, the problem of waste. In the case of Surabaya City in Indonesia, a lot of waste was lumped together and thrown into an open dump landfill, and there were many problems as a result of that. So in this community, organic waste was separated and they were converted into compost. Such a mechanism was introduced, and as a result of this effort, as you can see on the right-hand side, the amount of landfill waste has been reduced by 30% over a 5-year period, and today this has penetrated to 30,000 households, and this is also going to other cities as well as other countries. In terms of Rio+20 in Asia, such environmental improvement projects in 2002 at the Johannesburg summit, this was registered with the UN with a promise, and this can be presented as actual progress made to be input into Rio+20 conference. This is access to safe water. This is improvement of water business in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh. Many experts from Kita-Kyushu visited Phnom Penh, worked together with their experts to try to improve the water system there. And right now, purification rate, or rather leakage rate, has been reduced from 72 to 8% today. And they have direct access to water. That is, water from the faucet is portable, and this is now delivered to the citizens of Phnom Penh 24 hours a day. And other cities in Cambodia, the same system is now being rolled out. So inter-city cooperation, this is between cities. So the government, local government, and the citizens will work face-to-face together. So this is a face-to-face contact, reconciling environment and economy. Such concrete results of Kita-Kyushu can be understood by people in other countries. This is not investment in a negative sense. This is investment for growth, and actual results have already been observed. When you work on these projects, of course, self-help efforts are needed, but UNCRD and UNUI IAS, with such international cooperation, many advances can be made. Lastly, this is Asia's green growth. Now, this region is seeing high GDP growth, And in line with this, Kitakyushu's exports are going up. Many of them are green products. This is magnetic steel sheet of Nippon Steel. This is quite environmentally friendly and contributing to green growth. And Kitakyushu Asia Center for Low Carbon Society has been established, and this center is rolling out various projects. Just the other day, Vice Premier Xi Jinping visited our site, and he said that he would like to learn from this center. And as a Kitakyushu is now being reviewed, and the result of that review is to be disseminated to the rest of the world. And we would like to make a contribution to sustainable development of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hitsumoto. We need to wrap up. And I would like to thank all of you for coming to the public symposium and sharing with us your valuable time. I would like to thank the distinguished guests, the panelists, and facilitators. Thank you very much for the very insightful and educating the sessions. As we move forward towards the Rio+20 to be held in June, we should have the good focus on the urbanization and how we would be able to make cities sustainable. And we were able to have very good discussion today on these themes. And as the panelists have pointed out, and as we see urbanization being accelerated, it should be brought to a more sustainable level. Unless we will be able to do that, I don't think we will ever be able to see any sustainable development. And as we have seen for the city of Kitakyushu in Japan, there are many good cases and best practices that we will be able to be proud to share with the other cities of the world. And I hope that we will be able to put forward all this relevant information globally. And we would like to send the summary of the public symposium to the Secretariat of the Rio+20 so that we will be able to make our contribution. And it will also be posted to the website so that it will be widely publicized and disseminated. In New York from this week, as we move towards the Rio+20, the outcome document negotiation consultation that has been started. And we hope that outcome document, which is indeed the achievable and be implemented, would be fully adopted. In any case, we need to have a good understanding of sustainability, and we should make our utmost contribution that it would become workable and actually be implemented by us, all of us taking actions. And as we keep in mind the sustainability through our own behaviors and actions, there are many things we will be able to do ourselves. And keeping in mind what has been suggested today, and also to value electricity and water, and also to try to have a good segregated waste disposal, for example. By all of these the small efforts, we will be able to individually contribute to the process towards the Rio+20. And with this, I would like to close the public symposium on Rio+20. I would like to thank all of you for your kind attention.